Survival horror games with fixed camera angles is one of those genres that at a surface level looks really easy to create. Just throw together a space, add in some enemies with random camera angles with some auto aiming combat, and bam, you have a game. But I strongly feel the difficulty of getting these kind of games right is not appreciated enough. Do the enemies work in the space you have created? Do those camera angles make engaging with them fun or play into the design of those enemies? What is the resource management like? Is it better to fight or run? Are the enemies placed in a location that you have to revisit multiple times, making that decision even harder to decide on? How engaging are the puzzles? And this list goes on. These are all things that matter in a proper fixed camera survival horror experience, and I'm happy to say, while not perfect, Tormented Souls 2 is easily one of my favorite experiences in this genre. Something I wouldn't say about the first game, which I played for the first time earlier this year, and that's not to say the first Tormented Souls is bad. It's not. I do recommend it, but Tormented Souls 2 for me took that unrefined experience of the first game and really fine-tuned it into everything you would want to see from a sequel. But before I get into everything I enjoyed and disliked about Tormented Souls 2, I want to say there will be spoilers, so consider this your warning, and also shout out to the devs and publisher for throwing a review code my way. With all that said, it's time to dive into the strange world of Tormented Souls 2. So first, looking at the gameplay, it's everything you expect from a fixed camera game. You have both guns and melee weapons at your disposal for fighting. There's puzzles to solve, and your movement is pretty straightforward, with a choice between using modern movement or classic tank controls, and I want to focus on this for a minute. First off, if you're unfamiliar with what tank controls are, basically, the thumbstick or D-pad represents your character's positioning. Pushing forward makes your character walk forward, and pushing backwards makes them walk backwards. Same with pushing left or right. We'll always rotate them in those directions, and this movement works this way regardless of the camera angle. Then typically to run, you will have a dedicated button you hold down while holding forward to run. Then to counter turning slow, you have a quick 180 you can do while holding down backwards and pushing the run button, to help alleviate the pain that can come from using tank controls and combat encounters. So why even have them when with modern movement, your character could just snap around with the push of a thumbstick and you don't need dedicated buttons for running or flipping a 180? Well, it's because modern movement can be a pain to use in fixed camera games. Imagine you're in a tight space fighting a monster, and you have to dodge its attacks. You take the perfect angle to get away, but then the camera swaps angles. Now you barely move the thumbstick in a different direction, and bam, you get hit because of this, since your character flips aggressively into a random direction. Because when changing angles, if you're holding forward while a camera changes from an angle that's behind you to in front of you, you now have to either let go of the stick and start moving again to match that angle, or you watch your character freak out for a second before moving normal. So while tank controls can be strange to get used to if you're unfamiliar with them, I will always strongly recommend them if you're playing a game like this, because they are curated for a fixed camera experience, and I do believe once you get used to them, you will enjoy the experience so much more. I truly believe that, but that's enough ranting. Getting back to the other aspects of the gameplay. While traveling around and battling it out against the various enemies throughout the town of Villa Hesse, you have a variety of weapons and items to choose from that range from a high-powered nail gun to an oversized hammer, and each one of these really feel like they serve a purpose in the game and work perfectly well with the progression of the game. For example, the lighter protects you from the darkness, a mechanic that is core to the experience, since whenever you're not standing in a lighted area, darkness can consume you, which plays into everything, like how you may have to retreat from an enemy while holding your lighter out, till you get to an area with either a candle you lit or a light so you can pull out a weapon to fight back. Another example is with each melee weapon, you gain the ability to break something new. First, you have the vases you can break with the hammer, then the crates that are destroyed with the crowbar, then finally you have the cracked walls that are smashed by the sledgehammer. Basically, what I'm saying is while each weapon or item has a straightforward purpose, they also have other uses that make them feel so much more important. Like puzzles or certain situations will ask you to use your weapons in a way you wouldn't expect, which I really love this. So many times in these kind of games I ask myself, why can't the character just use their gun to break this lock or get out of this situation they are in? Like, these things could be used for more than just killing monsters, and I really appreciate the fact that they do. Though that doesn't take away the importance of these things having a purpose in combat. Because while you wouldn't think there could be depth to combat in a game like this thanks to how few mechanics there are, you might be surprised once you get into the rhythm of it. Now, I'm not saying Tormented Souls 2 is some deep game that requires some out-of-the-box thinking in combat, but you do have to consider your approach to encounters and not blindly blast away at everything you see. The shotgun can hit multiple enemies at once, so you may try to lure a group of enemies into a spot to maximize your damage. Or depending on the enemy, after doing so much damage, they will become stunned, allowing you to swap to a melee weapon to swing away to conserve ammo. Little things like this might seem not that important, but this is where the depth comes from a game like this. Figuring out when and what to use to help survive an encounter really makes the experience, though there are two things I feel is really missing from the combat that would have made this experience even better. First is vertical aiming. I really wish you could aim up or down, not just straight ahead. So instead of enemies just getting stunned from being shot, imagine if for less ammo and damage, you could aim down to shoot enemy legs, causing them to fall down in exchange for being able to run by them easier. Or imagine if you had to aim up to fight these spider-like enemies. These things first get introduced in this hallway running across the ceiling, and it made me instantly think that they would somehow attack me this way, but unfortunately they didn't. Which is a shame. It would have been so cool if they actually used that to their advantage, and you had to sometimes fight them that way to knock them down to bring them to your level. Now, while this isn't a big deal, it's something I would have loved to see. Then to add on to that, there is a backstep you can perform to avoid damage from enemies. This can be very satisfying and feels so good when you get the timing down, since it can't be spammed. You have to actually wait after shooting or swinging a melee weapon before you can use it. The only thing I wish with this is I really wanted the ability to sidestep. There are a variety of enemy attacks, and having the ability to sidestep would have felt really good for repositioning against enemies in tight spaces. Feels like a missed opportunity to not really evolve a mechanic like this from the first game, when you have so many other quality of life improvements like shortcuts for items, moving while aiming, and tank controls on the thumbstick. Though with all that said, something they did nail that few games like this get right are the boss fights. I really love the boss fights in this game because they are more than just shooting the big monster. From using daggers tucked away in corners to shooting a harpoon gun after it's been primed, almost every boss fight has a gimmick to it that helps them stand out from normal combat encounters, because that's usually one of the biggest issues games like this suffer from. Boss fights really never feel any different from normal encounters, so it was nice to see they tried to mix up the gameplay for these, and mostly nailed it. The only exception in the one fight I didn't like, a fight I won't show on screen for spoilers' sake, but the final boss fight was very underwhelming. I don't know if it's the design of the monster or just how the mechanics work, but I just didn't care for this fight at all. Felt like I was fighting a boss from a Devil May Cry game, not a survival horror game. And it felt oddly lazy that out of all the items you needed to use in this fight, they chose the crowbar. Like, come on, we couldn't have something like the sledgehammer have to be used to expose its weak point. But I am nitpicking here, and from a pure gameplay standpoint, the fight is fine. Though fighting isn't the only thing you're doing in Tormented Souls 2, and honestly, I would even say it's not the focal point of the game. That honor would probably have to go to the puzzles. The biggest reason for this is the fact that unlike a lot of survival horror games, there's no limit to how much you can hold, so ammo, healing items, and the weapons you carry on you aren't restricted in any way, so no matter the situation, if you grab it, you can hold it, which was how the first game was as well, but in doing this, while you don't restrict and have that inventory management part that you normally see in survival horror, it allows for a more creative approach to puzzles since you don't have to account for the player having that restricted inventory space. You can just kind of go wild, and the puzzle variety in this game is off the charts. Not a single puzzle felt like it was lazily done. All of them are fantastic, no matter how simple or complicated they are, forcing you to pay attention to everything around you from the environment down to a simple piece of paper with some scribble. Plus, just the way you interact with certain puzzles where you have to manually do things like press a button at a certain point after activating a tape recorder or traveling through time in alternate worlds to solve a problem. It's just so much fun to engage with these, and Tormented Souls 2 without a doubt has the best puzzles out of any survival horror game I've played. I suppose though, some of that is thanks to the environments you travel through. Each area really stands out, and everything in them feels so fitting. The school, for example, revolves around using fuses to power different floors to access areas. It features enemies that range from tiny childlike creatures to a science lab autonomy dummy. There's puzzles where you have to give an apple to a dead teacher, and so on. These details are what make these environments feel so good to explore, even after 10 or more hours, because the game is constantly evolving alongside them. The new enemies, puzzles, weapons, and items all flow perfectly. It really is something else, and I never expected the game to pull this off. Even the use of music, in the absence of music, is really well done. I'm really glad they managed to get this right, because one of the biggest things I disliked about the first game was how bland the game felt by the end of it. While the puzzles were good, the location and enemies never really felt like they evolved throughout the game, but they nailed it in the sequel. Which, speaking of nailed, one of the biggest reasons I was drawn to Tormented Souls was because of the main weapon being a nailer. As someone who works construction and uses nail guns on a daily basis, I felt like this really spoke to me, as dumb as that sounds. I love the idea of makeshift weapons, and the fact these weapons hit so close to home for me just makes it that much better. Now, I want to talk about performance for a second. So I played Tormented Souls 2 on PC, which I want to note my PC is basically as powerful as you could make one, but I had zero performance issues even while recording footage with the same PC that I played on, but I did encounter a few minor glitches, one being that the main character Caroline's hair would get a little weird during cutscenes. Then the other glitch I experienced was that while playing with tank controls, I would lose the ability to flip a quick 180, so I had to restart the game 3 different times during my playthrough to fix that. So nothing crazy, but wanted to throw that out there, and overall I couldn't really ask for the game to run better, unlike the story. So the story of Tormented Souls 2 is pretty straightforward. You go to the town of Villa Hesse to help out your sister Anna, who at times blacks out and draws things that apparently seem to come to pass. But after arriving, a deranged woman named Lucia takes Anna, and you must set off as Caroline to rescue your sister. Nothing wrong with this. It's not the craziest plot ever when just looking at what the main objective is. But when I was running around, reading notes, meeting other characters, and learning what happened in this town, there's a few moments where I couldn't help but just think to myself, this is pretty interesting, and I want to find out more. Or what's around the next corner, since the environments are so fun to explore and have their own stories to tell. Though I will admit, while the story and cutscenes are a step up from the first game, the animations of characters and voice acting are not the best. These definitely still need a little work, though I would be lying if I didn't say I actually found these somewhat charming, since the animations and cutscenes give you that late 90s, early 2000s era survival horror vibe. Plus, since the story is so self-contained from the first game, you can enjoy it without playing the first, but there are some fun details and callbacks that you won't be able to appreciate without playing the first. Though with all that said, Tormented Souls 2 is a game I went into with some pretty low expectations after playing the first. I figured it would do a few things a little better, but I didn't expect it to be one of my favorite fixed camera survival horror games I've played in the last 10 years that I would recommend without question. They've really truly understood the shortcomings of the first game, allowing them to make the changes needed most to make this sequel better. But now if they decide to make a third game, they can take this experience and truly perfect it with a few more tweaks to create what could become a true survival horror masterpiece.